This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, my name is Sue Bright. I'm a regulatory project manager with the Corps of Engineers. I've been a project manager for over 20 years, and I work in the Sault Sainte Marie field office, evaluating permits and conducting compliance inspections in the eastern UP and northern lower Michigan. My background is in biology, and I will be presenting the Corps of Engineers regulatory program, Waterways, Wetlands, and when you may need a permit. I'm going to give an overview of the Corps of Engineers regulatory program, regulatory jurisdiction over navigable waters of the U.S. and wetlands, shoreline protection projects, and some permit requirements. The Detroit district covers the state of Michigan and northern Indiana. There are 6 field offices covered by the Detroit district. There's one in Marquette, Sault Sainte Marie, which I'm out of, Bay City, Grand Haven, Detroit, and South Bend. This map, it can be found on the Detroit district website with the contacts for each office if you have any questions. The mission of our regulatory program is to provide strong protection of the nation's aquatic environment, and we do that through permit evaluation and enforcement of permit laws. We have 2 main statutory authorities for the regulatory program. The first is Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, under which we regulate structures and work in navigable waters of the U.S. This includes projects such as dredging and placement of fill material in the waterway. And regulated structures can be seasonal, temporary, or permanent. The second authority is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, under which we regulate discharges of dredged or fill material into waters of the U.S., including wetlands. You'll hear me refer to these simply as Section 10 and Section 404. A permit is required in the state of Michigan for any structure of work in a navigable water of the U.S. or any discharge of dredge or fill material in wetlands adjacent to navigable waters of the U.S. Most shore protection projects require a permit from the Corps of Engineers. Also, a list of navigable waters can be found on the Detroit District's website. This diagram shows the waters of the U.S., which include navigable waters of the United States, tributaries to the navigable waters of the U.S., and adjacent wetlands. Section 404 is a little bit special for us here in Michigan. The state, through the Eagle, has assumed part of our Section 404 permit program for the interior waters. And in these areas, in the interior parts of the state, a Corps permit is not typically required. The Corps has retained its regulatory program responsibilities over navigable waters of the U.S., which are all the Section 10 waters, as well as any wetlands adjacent to those navigable waters. This diagram sums up the areas under Section 10 and 404. We're looking at a slice of landscape here, and the waterway may look like a fish pond, but it's represented a navigable water in our diagram. The navigable waterway is subject to both Section 10 and Section 404, and the adjacent wetlands is subject to 404 only. Now let's talk a little more specifically about where the water ends and the upland begins. Our jurisdiction limit for waterways is at what we call the ordinary high water mark. It's defined as a line on the shore established by the fluctuations of water and indicated by physical characteristics such as a clear natural line impressed on the bank shelving, changes in the character of soil, destruction of terrestrial vegetation, the presence of litter and debris, or other appropriate means that consider the characteristics of the surrounding areas. Basically, the ordinary high water mark is determined by presence of certain physical characteristics which we can often determine in a site visit. However, on the Great Lakes, in many cases, there may not be sufficient physical characteristics to determine the ordinary high water mark. So we use an elevation that is coincident with where we have seen these characteristics. And here's a picture of an ordinary high water mark on Lake Michigan. And in this case, the ordinary high water mark is located at the toe of the vegetated dune. See, my mouse has its own ordinary high water mark. The Corps of Engineers conducts jurisdictional determinations to determine if your property has any waterways or wetlands that are within the Corps' jurisdiction and the Corps' ordinary high water mark. A JD can be requested by contacting us. So how do you know whether you have wetlands on your property? We can help with that too. A service of the regulatory office provides free of charge is wetland determinations and delineations. We will come out to do a site visit and determine whether there are wetlands on that site. In the case of individual property owners with relative small parcels, we can delineate the wetland boundaries. Many people hire an environmental consultant to delineate wetlands. In this case, we will come out to the site so we can verify the boundaries delineated by the consultant. Some wetlands are pretty obviously wetlands, but others don't even appear to be wet for much of the year. We define wetlands based on 3 parameters: hydrology, soils, and vegetation. Wetland hydrology is the presence or evidence of water at the site. It could be as obvious as standing water. If the ground is squishy, that's usually a good clue as well, indicating saturation at the soil surface. Other indicators are these watermarks right here, left silt as it receded, and these water stained leaves, which have become dark because they have been underwater for some time. You can see the freshly fallen leaf on top of the contrast. Also, these buttressed tree roots are an adaptation for trees living in a very wet soils. Wetland soils are defined by particular indicators, and we look at the color, texture, patterns of layering, or modeling of different colors, and sometimes even the smell of soils to see if they formed under saturated conditions. Finally, we look at the vegetation. Plant species are classified based on their frequency of occurrence in wetlands versus uplands. We look at whether a site has a predominance of vegetation that occurs more frequently in wet soils. To determine what is wetland versus upland, we use various technical resources, including our Wetland Delineation Manual, regional supplements to the manual, and a guide to field indicators of hydric soils and our national wetland plant list. These resources are also found on our website. If you have a project that involves jurisdictional waters of the U.S., then an application is to be submitted for the proposed work. At this time of high water levels on the Great Lakes, the majority of the proposed work is for shore protection. I will cover the process to apply for a permit for shore protection. As far as timeframes, our goals are to evaluate general permits within 60 days and individual permits within 120 days. These timeframes begin from the date we receive what we consider a complete application. To streamline the process, submit a complete permit application and tailor your project to meet general permit terms and conditions for our nationwide and regional permits. Of course, general permits for shore protection projects include regional permits for seawalls and backfill. Some key criteria are replacement of seawalls must be 1 foot or less waterward of the existing seawall. And we have lake-specific maximum waterward extent for new seawalls. Or if the replacement for over 200 feet of a seawall, Eagle must issue a permit first. The regional permit for riprap limits the length of the riprap along the shoreline to 300 feet in length. The riprap can extend no more than 5 feet waterward of the Corps' ordinary high water mark and can be at no more than a 1 to 1.5 slope. Nationwide 13 can also be used to authorize riprap, revetments, and other bank stabilization projects that have minimal impacts. And it provides a little more flexibility on project size than the regional permits. Some of the key terms and conditions are listed here. Some of the limits on nationwide permit 13 can be waived if we determine that the project would have minimal impacts and after we coordinate the project with the state and federal resource agencies. That coordination adds 10 to 25 to our review process, and we'll consider those comments when determining whether the project qualifies for a nationwide permit. If the project meets the terms and conditions without requiring a waiver of any of these conditions, the extra agency coordination may not be necessary. And this is a picture of riprap placed at the toe of the slope. This picture shows sandbags placed waterward of the toe of the slope, and they generally require a permit from the Corps of Engineers, and we usually issue this under a nationwide 13. This is a typical example of impact reduction that we may consider during a review of shore protection projects. The proposal on the left involves a substantial amount of backfill. In cases like this, we would ask you to minimize impacts by locating the shore protection further landward towards the existing shoreline, slope or bluff, and minimizing the backfill placed behind the stone or the structure. The proposed on the right is more likely to qualify for a general permit and would probably have a much faster review time. In general, applicants submit their application directly to Eagle through the My Waters website, and Eagle will determine which applications to forward to the Corps. Keep in mind that although both agencies accept a single application form, the Corps and Eagle have separate review processes. Each agency has its own set of regulations, and we make separate permit decisions. Because of this, the information required by Eagle may differ from the information required by the Corps. There can be a lot that goes into a complete application. If the application is not complete when we receive it, you have to wait for us to request information, then we wait for you to provide it. If the information you provide in your response is not clear to us, we're going to continue asking you questions. Once we receive all the information needed for the application to be considered complete, only then our review clock starts ticking. Another step is to think about is the construction sequence. In addition to the finished structures and fill areas, there are a lot of activities that go on during this construction process that may need to be authorized in a permit. We'll need detail on the equipment that would be used, how to access the waterway, how you're proposing to do the work, and whether any temporary work or fills are proposed in the waterway. Besides identifying aspects of jurisdictional work that would need to be included in a permit, the construction sequence and temporary construction measures help us evaluate the potential impacts of work. For example, these two projects could have very different impacts on water quality. And this is an example of a proposed revetment. There's a cross section on the left and the overhead view on the right. So next we talk about our jurisdiction, limits of jurisdiction. And this drawing is showing the ordinary high water mark and the toe of the bluff, which is would be the limit of the Corps' jurisdiction. And it should show the volume of fill material below the plane of the ordinary high water mark and the volume of fill waterward of the toe of the bluff. And this drawing shows the ordinary high water mark, the toe of the bluff, length, width, depth of the area to be dredged, right in here, with volume expressed in cubic yards. And it shows the length and width and height of the proposed shore protection to be discharged below the ordinary high water mark and expressed in cubic yards. This is ultimately what we're looking for. This is another cross-section drawing showing the existing conditions, temporary stockpiling area, and ordinary high water mark with measurements. The most requested piece of information is the project drawing. Sometimes applicants don't include drawings at all, but more often drawings are included that don't show all the information we need. We use these drawings for public notices and other coordination, and also in your permits. So they need to be clear, easily understandable, and reproducible on 8.5 by 11 inch paper. Color and highlighting tend to disappear in the copy machine, so it can be helpful to use different cross-hatching or textures to show different dredge or fill areas. Scale drawings are by far the best, and it really helps us if you include a scale bar on the drawing instead of just a ratio scale, because the ratio changes if the page is resized in printing or copying. Here's a basic example drawing containing the information we need for our evaluation. This drawing shows a proposed dock. All the dimensions of the proposed structure are shown, and so are the distances to the property lines, other nearby structures, and at fixed points such as corner of the house. These dimensions let us know exactly where the structure would be located. Cross-section drawings show the elevation of the proposed work in relation to the water level and waterway contours. If you're able, it's helpful to show the course and eagle ordinary high watermark elevations on both the plan view and cross-section drawings. Keep in mind that the core and eagle ordinary high watermarks are usually at different elevations. So if you show just one ordinary high watermark, we're going to ask you to clarify. For dredging projects, we should be able to look at the cross-section drawing and find out the proposed bottom dredge depth elevation. The bottom dredge elevation can be shown in two ways. If you're familiar with surveying methods, you could provide us with the bottom dredge elevation relative to a particular datum. For example, you might propose to dredge to a depth of 570 feet, IGLD 1985. Otherwise, you would tell us how deep you plan to dredge relative to the water level on the date that you specify. In this example, cross-section, we can use information on the water depth and the lake level on a particular date to calculate the bottom elevation. We can see that you propose to dredge 5 feet below the ordinary high water mark, or below the water level on this date. We can look up what the water level was on that date. You specify, subtract the dredge depth to find the bottom elevation for this dredging project. On the Great Lakes and other waterways that are at the same elevation as the Great Lakes, you can use the water level as a reference elevation. The website will provide the current and past water levels at a variety of gauge stations around the Great Lakes. You might ask why we're giving you the NOAA website to find water levels rather than the ones that we post every day on the Corps of Engineers website. The Corps of Engineers posted lake levels are an average of all gauges for the whole lake. Given our predominant west winds, the water level is often a few inches higher on the Michigan side of Lake Michigan than on the Wisconsin side. So the water level gauge information from the location closest to the project site is most representative of the water level at this site. And this is an example drawing showing existing and proposed conditions, where he stated where the water level was and the date he took it on. And please submit photos to show the existing conditions. They provide information and eliminate the need for a site visit from the course. Our general advice to you is to apply early. Don't wait until the last minute, or you may find yourself in trouble if we need additional information or if issues come up in your evaluation. Eagle will forward your application to the Corps if it's in or near navigable waters and their adjacent wetlands. We will acknowledge receipt of your application by email. If you know you need a Corps permit and don't hear from us, feel free to contact us and check in on your application status. There are many resources you can use to help you find the information you need for your application, and you can find links to many of these on our website. Our navigable waters list and wetland determination resources are also available on our wetland, as we mentioned, including technical information and resources. Finally, your local Corps or Eagle office, a great resource. Now I will turn this over to the Sioux Area Office Park Ranger, Michelle Briggs.
Thank you, Sue. Are you able to see my screen?
No. There you go. In there. Okay.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. While we give everyone a chance to type in some questions for Sue, I'm going to cover our status in our district visitor centers. Our visitor centers remain closed. For people going to the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center in Duluth, they are doing vessel arrival and departure announcements. There is a do-it-yourself tour using your cell phone available outdoors. There is a virtual online tour of the museum posted on the internet. And they are providing outdoor guest services, which you see in the photograph there, where they're posting posting schedules of vessels and there to answer questions and distribute literature. And they have their visitor center association is operating an outdoor gift shop so that you can pick up your souvenirs and help support this nonprofit agency that helps support the visitor center. At the Sioux Locks, we have our exhibits installed in the park. We are doing vessel arrival announcements. There is an attendant outdoors on the north side of the building posting a boat schedule, which you see there in the lower photo, and answering questions and making sure that water safety materials and brochures are available. And for children visiting the park, we have a scavenger hunt available. They can find all the answers to the questions and get a junior ranger badge when they bring their sheet back to the attendant. We hope to have that scavenger hunt posted online in the next week or two. Our visitor centers will remain closed until they can comply with state and federal guidance and when local health conditions permit. I mentioned we are looking at extending the virtual visitor center, and I'll have some more about that in a minute, but I will turn this over so Sue can answer your questions that have come in. And I have a question myself to answer or to ask. Are you ready, Sue?
Let's see.
Okay. One of the questions that I had is what are some of the negative impacts that could happen if somebody doesn't go through this process and apply for a permit and they just start installing riprap or they install their own dock? What could happen to them, their adjacent properties, etc.? Not just legally, but what could happen to that shoreline?
Oh, well, it depends on how they put the rock in. For the most part, people are dumping just rock over the whatever on the shoreline, and it's not heavy enough and not the correct size. So usually it just goes out to sea. Other people have done sandbags, which they find that don't withstand the wave or action and wind action. So they usually rip apart. But if they do it, we usually come back to them and have them apply for an after the fact permit. And so they still have to apply and fill out the application. And as for docks, for the most part, just an open pile dock is allowed for one dock for each property owner. So they're able to enjoy the waterway, and dock their boat.
Okay.
And usually doesn't have any repercussions. I mean, we don't usually allow solid fill docks out. I don't think anybody's doing that anymore, so usually it doesn't have any kind of environmental repercussion for a dock.
So basically, one of the big things that could happen if people don't apply for the permit, they could end up wasting a lot of time and money installing something that is ultimately not going to work.
Right, for the riprap, for the most part, it's shoreline protection.
And then I had another question for you. What is eagle that you kept referring to?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I didn't, somebody help me out. Environment, Great Lakes.
This is Don. Can you hear
Environment,
me?
Great Lakes.
Oh, sorry. And I forgot to mention too, we have Don
Sorry.
Reinke, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who is here to help answer questions. He's also with our Detroit District Regulatory Office.
I'm also with the Corps' Regulatory Office. The EAGLE is the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes,
Great.
and Energy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the acronym is EGLE. They prefer to be called EAGLE.
And is there a comparable agency in Minnesota for those people watching from Duluth?
There may be a comparable state agency. There's certainly a regulatory office with the St. Paul District, so the Corps of Engineers. I'm not sure what the state of Minnesota's land and water management program consists of, but I presume they have, state program.
Okay.
It'd be easy enough to look up Minnesota DNR or something like that, and it would show up.
Thank you. Here's one that Don answered in the chat, but I'm going to give Sue a crack at it too.
Thank you.
Could dredging for beach restoration be approved for Great Lakes shorelines and inland lakes? This is a common practice rebuilding Florida beaches.
Sure. Beach nourishment.
And is that something then that the Corps of Engineers would be involved in issuing permits for?
No, we don't have big projects like that for beach nourishment like New Jersey does.
Okay.
Along New Jersey shores, or no, that's not a core project, but they do require a permit. There are a few sites that we allow beach nourishment.
And could you remind us again where the other field offices in the Detroit district are?
One's in Marquette, one's in Bay City, one's in Grand Haven, one's down there in Detroit, and also the Michiana branch down in South Bend, Indiana.
And go ahead, sorry.
No, and here in the Sioux.
That is the questions we have received so far.
That's great.
I guess you answered everyone's queries.
Right. Okay. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on. And I am also right now going to post that contact information that you see in the slide into the chat so that if anyone has some questions later, you can copy and paste the links to those websites and the link to send an email directly to the regulatory office.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And this slide, some of the early arrival people saw it earlier. We are looking at continuing the virtual visitor center year round. And we are looking at what kind of things people are interested in hearing about. We'd like to know about future topics that you're interested in, what duration, once a month, every other week, what people think is best days or times. I will kind of give a caveat that we pick Thursdays because that is the day that pretty much all of the Detroit District Park Rangers are on duty. We have rotating schedules to accommodate the daily visitation in the visitor centers. And I would like to invite people to contact us directly or in our survey to let us know some feedback about this and your suggestions for future programs. I'm going to post the links to my email address, the LSMVC email address, and our survey in the chat function there. So you can just directly click on those. And please let us, give us some guidance, help us set our course for where we're going to take this journey next. And with that, I'll thank everyone for